Why was the radio so quiet when everyone around was dying? The convoy was pinned in the mountains, 3 Humvees burning, flames licking at the sky like signal fires to the gods of war. Black smoke curled into the Afghan sun, thick and bitter, carrying the smell of burning fuel and fear. Small arms cracked from the ridge line. PKM bursts echoed like thunder. It wasn't a fight anymore, it was an execution. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen crouched behind a shattered tire, sweat mixing with dust and blood on his face. His platoon, what was left of it, huddled behind the last armored vehicle still standing. Half of them wounded, all of them terrified. The kind of fear that doesn't make you freeze. It makes you calculate how long until you run out of ammo, until the next man dies. Chen pressed his radio to his mouth, voice shaking. Any station, this is Havoc 2-3. We're pinned. Taking heavy fire, multiple casualties, can't move forward or back. We need immediate close air support or we're done. Static, nothing but the soft hiss of the dying. Then a voice, calm, low, with the faintest drawl. Havoc 2-3, this is Reaper 6-1. I've got eyes on your position. Sit tight and keep your heads down. This'll be over in 8 minutes. 8 minutes? Chen blinked through sweat and disbelief. 8 minutes? The sound of incoming rounds ripped through his thought. One bullet pinged off the steel next to his helmet. He flinched. Men shouted. Somewhere to his right, someone screamed for a medic. The ridge above them was alive with muzzle flashes, bright, chaotic stars against the dust. He didn't know who Reaper 6-1 was. Didn't know that the voice belonged to Captain Isabella Reed, 32 years old, an Apache pilot with 7 years of combat experience and more flight hours than most pilots twice her age. He didn't know that she'd been circling 15 kilometers away when his call came through, and that when she heard the words, "We're done," she didn't hesitate. She pushed her throttle forward, the Apache's twin engines roaring as it knifed through the air like a predator closing in. Up in the sky, Captain Reed's eyes flicked between digital displays and the terrain rushing beneath her. The mountains were sharp, unforgiving, gray bones of the earth that had buried better soldiers than any of them. Her hands moved over the controls with precision born of repetition. Calm, measured. Her heart didn't race, it never did in combat. That came after. 15 distinct firing positions, said her co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Jake Morrison. His voice was tight but steady. Machine guns, RPGs, elevated positions. They've boxed that convoy in a kill zone. Not for long, Isabella replied, drawl fading as her focus sharpened, starting with the heavies. Her HUD blinked to life. The Apache's targeting systems, TADS, painted enemy positions across the landscape like constellations of death. Red squares glowed against the ridge lines, every one of them a man trying to kill someone she hadn't even met. Below, the convoy was vanishing beneath dust and smoke. She lowered the nose, engaging. The 30 chain gun spun up, its deep mechanical growl filling the cockpit. Then came the sound, that brutal percussive BRRRT, like an angry god clearing its throat. Each round tore through rock, sandbags, and flesh alike. The ridge erupted in bursts of dust and smoke. 1 second, a machine gun nest was spitting fire. The next, it was gone, replaced by silence and falling debris. First target neutralized, Morrison said, moving to the next. Isabella's eyes darted across the targeting grid. The helmet display followed her gaze, shifting the chain gun's aim with microscopic precision. RPG team, 2 o'clock behind the boulder. She exhaled slowly. Copy that, visual confirmed. Trigger squeeze. A flash. The boulder shattered. The fighters behind it disappeared in an instant. Third position down, Morrison called. North face cluster firing again. Isabella banked hard left, feeling the centrifugal force drag against her body. The Apache rolled with her, the sky tilting, the ridge rotating into view, every motion seamless, instinctive. She didn't fly the Apache. She became it. "Switching to rockets," she said. "Hydra's loaded." "Copy. You've got 3 positions grouped together near the crest." "Perfect." 6 Hydra 70 rockets shot out in quick succession. The whoosh of release. The whine of their flight. Then 6 sunbursts lighting up the ridge. Each impact thundered across the valley, echoing like a drumline of vengeance. Chen looked up from behind his Humvee, stunned. He couldn't see the helicopter yet, but he saw the results. The ridge, that impossible wall of death, was disintegrating. Every muzzle flash replaced by fireballs. Every shout from the enemy drowned by explosions. "Who the hell is that?" one of his men gasped. Chen didn't answer. He just whispered, "Whoever she is, she's saving us." "Positions 4 through 6 destroyed," Morrison confirmed. His tone changed, less tension now, more rhythm. The cockpit was a world of motion, light, and coordination, 2 people moving with one mind. "They're regrouping west," he added. "I see them," Isabella said, eyes narrowing. Her display lit up with new thermal signatures, dozens of hot spots scrambling downhill. "They're trying to reposition. Smart move, but not fast enough." The chain gun came alive again. Controlled bursts. Precise. Ruthless. Enemy fighters fell one after another, their tactical advantage gone. The ambush that was meant to slaughter American soldiers was unraveling, methodically, mercilessly. "Reaper 6-1, this is Havoc 2-3, Chen's voice came through, adrenaline sharp in his tone. "I don't know what you're doing up there, but keep doing it." "Copy Havoc," Isabella replied calmly, hands dancing across controls. "Stay in cover. You're clear to breathe again, but we're not done." 9 positions eliminated in 4 minutes. "New contact," Morrison said. "Technical vehicle moving south ridge. Heavy machine gun mounted." Isabella's eyes locked on it instantly. A pickup truck kicking up dust fast, reckless, desperate. "Taking the shot," she said. Her thumb flipped the selector. Hellfire missile. The cockpit filled with the shrill tone of a target lock. Then rifle. The missile launched from the wing with a flash, cutting through the mountain air. 8 seconds later, a fireball bloomed across the ridge. The truck evaporated in flame. Position 10 destroyed. 5 left, Morrison noted, scanning. "They're breaking contact." "Negative." Isabella's voice hardened. "They'll regroup and ambush another convoy tomorrow. We finish it now." She pushed the Apache forward, low, fast, aggressive. The mountains blurred past. Her chain gun tracked 4 fighters sprinting for a cave. 3-second burst. Gone. Another group tried to hide behind a stone wall. Rockets erased it and them. Morrison called out the last 2 targets. Hardened bunkers, upper ridge, Soviet-era concrete, chain gun won't penetrate. "Then we use something bigger." She selected the last 2 Hellfire missiles. Brought the Apache into a hover. The helicopter steadied in the wind, a deliberate, defiant silhouette against the Afghan sun. Rifle. First missile streaked across the sky. Impact, explosion, concrete turned to dust. Rifle. Second missile followed. The second bunker vanished in another plume of fire. Silence. The entire ridge line, once a fortress of enemy fire, was nothing but smoke, craters, and echoes. "Havoc 2-3, Reaper 6-1, Isabella transmitted. Her voice was steady, almost gentle now. "Area secure. You're clear to move your wounded. Medevac inbound in 12 minutes. Chen pressed the radio to his ear, his voice trembling with something between exhaustion and gratitude. "I don't know who you are, Reaper 6-1, but you just saved 15 lives. Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it." Isabella's reply was simple. "Just doing my job, Sergeant. Get your people home safe." She eased the Apache into a wide orbit. the smoke below curling into the sky like the aftermath of a nightmare. 15 enemy positions destroyed. 0 friendly casualties. 8 minutes. Morrison leaned back in his seat, finally exhaling. 15 targets, 8 minutes. You know that's going to end up in someone's report. Maybe, Isabella said softly, eyes fixed on the horizon. But that's not what matters. What does? She glanced at the burning valley below, at the tiny figures of soldiers dragging their wounded to safety. That they lived. The Apache turned toward base, disappearing into the setting sun. The wind carried only silence, and the faint hum of rotors, fading like the last heartbeat of a dying storm. She landed the Apache in silence. The engines whined down, rotors slowing, dust swirling through the dusk like ghosts unwilling to leave the battlefield behind. The air still smelled faintly of cordite and burned steel, the scent of things that had survived fire. Captain Isabella Reed sat motionless in the cockpit, hands resting on the controls long after the blades stopped. Her reflection flickered faintly across the glass, eyes calm but distant. In combat, she was mechanical precision. Afterward, she was haunted silence. Morrison finally broke it. 15 targets in 8 minutes. You realize you just pulled off the impossible. Isabella didn't look up. Wasn't impossible, just necessary. He leaned back with a low exhale. You scare me sometimes, you know that. You scare easy, she replied softly. But her voice didn't carry pride, just exhaustion. The debriefing at Forward Operating Base Salerno was quick, clinical, and detached. Colonel James Martinez, their commanding officer, reviewed the gun camera footage frame by frame. Each target, each shot, every explosion captured with surgical precision. He watched quietly, his expression caught somewhere between admiration and disbelief. When the video ended, he turned to her. Outstanding work, Captain. That convoy was minutes from being wiped out. You saved a lot of lives today. Isabella's drawl returned, faint but respectful. Just doing my job, sir. Martinez smiled, though not entirely at ease. You make it look easy. Most pilots would have needed 20 minutes and half a payload to do what you just did. Morrison, standing beside her, added evenly, Captain Reed sees the whole battlefield. Geometry, timing, movement. She knows exactly where to position before the fight even starts. Martinez nodded, which is why you're being requested by name for a special briefing tomorrow morning. High priority. Secure room 0700. That caught Isabella's attention. Requested by name. Those words never meant simple missions. They meant someone somewhere needed something impossible. She gave a small nod. Copy that, sir. Later that evening, she walked alone to the maintenance hangar. The lights glowed a soft amber against the hulking silhouette of her Apache. Its armor pocked with the day's battle, scorch marks across its fuselage like scars. Chief Warrant Officer Rachel Santos, the senior mechanic, was half buried beneath the helicopter's frame, tightening something with the confidence of someone who treated machines like family. Captain Reed, she greeted without looking up. Your birds refueled, reloaded, and already making the rest of the hangar jealous. She flew perfectly. Isabella smiled faintly. She always does. Santos slid out from beneath the chopper, wiping her hands. Word travels fast, ma'am. Heard you cleaned a whole ridge line in 8 minutes flat. That's an exaggeration, Isabella replied quietly. It took 8 minutes and 32 seconds. Santos grinned. Guess that's the pilot way of bragging, rounding up instead of down. The two women shared a rare, small laugh. Then, as the noise faded, Isabella ran a hand along the Apache's armor. Her fingertips traced the cool metal. How's the chain gun holding up? Flawless, Santos said. You hit all 15 targets, not a jam or misfire. She's running smoother than most birds out of the factory. Keep her that way, Isabella murmured. I might need her again soon. Santos studied her a moment. Something big. Isabella hesitated. They're calling me into a classified briefing. Then yeah, Santos said, crossing her arms. Something big. That night in the dim barracks light, Isabella lay awake. The sound of distant generators filled the silence. She could still feel the faint vibration of the Apache's controls in her palms, the rhythm of recoil, the pulse of machinery and death. 15 targets, 15 lives. People who'd woken up that morning, eaten breakfast, maybe even laughed. Now gone. She didn't regret it. They ambushed her people. They'd chosen the fight. But she never let herself forget. Every trigger pull had a cost. You can't kill that many people and walk away untouched. So she didn't. She carried them, the enemy faces she never saw, the American voices she never met. They lived in the spaces between her breaths, the silences after victory. Sometimes at night, she'd hear the wind and mistake it for rotor wash. She turned her head toward the small desk beside her bunk. A photograph sat there, faded from sand and time. A younger Isabella in flight school, grinning with her class, back before she'd learned how heavy silence could feel. Her mind drifted to the voice she'd heard over the radio that day, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen. The fear, the desperation, the disbelief when she'd told him to wait 8 minutes. She wondered if he'd made it back. She hoped he had. She always hoped they did. Sleep came slowly, as it always did after a mission. The next morning, she walked into the secure briefing room with Morrison at her side. The air smelled of coffee and printer ink, the scent of plans that would change someone's life, or end it. Colonel Martinez stood near the front, alongside 2 unfamiliar figures, one in civilian clothes, the other a decorated Special Forces colonel. The civilian woman's posture screamed CIA even without the badge. The colonel's ribbon spoke of more wars than anyone cared to count. Captain Reed, Chief Morrison, Martinez greeted. Thank you for coming. This is Sarah Chen, Central Intelligence Agency, and Colonel David Harper, 5th Special Forces Group. Isabella and Morrison exchanged glances. Whatever this was, it wasn't a standard flight assignment. Sarah Chen stepped forward, tapping a remote. The wall display came to life, satellite imagery of a compound nestled deep in mountainous terrain. 3 buildings, multiple guard posts, anti-aircraft positions, and red markers everywhere. 3 days ago, Sarah began, her tone crisp and controlled. One of our intelligence assets went dark in Pakistan. We've confirmed he's being held in this compound, a fortified position controlled by a high-value target we've tracked for over 18 months. Colonel Harper took over, voice gravelly with years of command. Normal extraction won't work. Too many defenses. Ground assault means heavy casualties. Air insertion is suicide if we don't neutralize the anti-aircraft threats first. He looked directly at Isabella. That's where you come in, Captain. She studied the screen, her tactical mind already processing the geometry, approach vectors, weapon arcs, wind patterns. The enemy had thought this through. Whoever placed the Zu-23 twin-barrel gun on that upper platform knew what they were doing. You want me to clear the air defenses, she said flatly, and keep them off your team while they extract. Sarah Chen nodded. We've analyzed your record. Yesterday's engagement wasn't luck, it's consistency. You read the battlefield in ways other pilots don't. We need that precision. We need you. Harper leaned closer to the map. Our assault force will consist of 2 Blackhawks carrying 12 operators. Fast rope insertion, grab the asset, exfil under your cover. Time on target, 15 minutes. You eliminate the Zu-23 in your first pass, that's mission critical. Morrison whistled low under his breath. 15 minutes, that's tight. Harper smiled grimly. Welcome to our world. Isabella's gaze stayed on the screen. Rules of engagement. Anyone armed is hostile, Chen replied. Your target priority is the anti-aircraft gun, command structures, and fortified positions. Once the extraction begins, your job is overwatch and chaos. There was a long pause. Then Isabella said quietly, "When do we launch?" "Tomorrow night, 0200 hours, Harper answered. "You'll have your Apache. A second bird will remain on standby for emergency support. You'll have 30 minutes to soften defenses before insertion." Colonel Martinez folded his hands. "Captain, I want to be clear. This mission is voluntary. It's dangerous. No one will question you if you decline." Isabella's lips curved just slightly. "With respect, sir, if you wanted someone who declines dangerous missions, you wouldn't have called me." The briefing ended, but the room's tension lingered like static in the air. As they left, Morrison muttered, "You realize this is going to be hell, right?" Isabella gave a short nod. "Most worthwhile things are." The rest of the day was consumed by planning. Maps spread across tables, flight paths drawn and redrawn, ammunition loadouts adjusted to the gram. They counted seconds like they were currency, because in combat they were. 15 Hellfire missiles, 76 Hydra rockets, 1,200 rounds for the 30 chain gun. Everything the Apache could carry, everything she'd need. Rachel Santos personally oversaw the loading. "You're carrying full weight," she warned. "That's a lot of steel to lift. You'll feel it in the turns." "I'll manage," Isabella said simply. "I've flown heavier." By nightfall, her Apache stood ready on the flight line, black and gleaming under the floodlights, loaded like a storm waiting for permission to break. Morrison joined her at the edge of the tarmac. "You ever get tired of this?" "Of what?" "Being the one they call when things are impossible." Isabella's eyes stayed on the horizon, where the last orange trace of sunset was fading. "Impossible," she said softly, "just means it hasn't been done yet." That night she dreamed again. Not of explosions or death, but of silence. A strange, endless quiet where the only sound was the soft hum of rotors and a voice on the radio whispering, "Sit tight. This will be over in 8 minutes." She woke before dawn, checked her gear, tied her hair back tight, and walked out into the pre-dawn chill where her Apache waited, shadowed, silent, and alive. Another mission. Another mountain. Another promise that someone would live if she flew fast enough. Why did the night feel like a held breath, waiting for the thing that would either break it or let everyone exhale? They launched at 200, under a ceiling of stars stolen by mountain shadow. The world below was a quilt of black ridges and silvered rock. Even the moon seemed to keep its face turned away. Isabella climbed into the cockpit like stepping into a confessional, the metal closet where decisions made in seconds would decide who lived. Jake Morrison strapped in with the practiced movements of a man who had lived with danger long enough to make ritual from it. He checked the systems, fingers moving through a choreography they no longer needed to speak. Outside, the second Apache's engines hummed like a distant swarm, a promise of backup, a precaution that comforted no one but the logistics officers. "No ceremony," Isabella said, quieter than the instruments. "We fly hard, we hit clean, we come home." Morrison's answer was a short nod. "Copy. Assault package wheels up in 30. The flight was low. The pilot's world narrowed to the green wash of night vision screens and the jagged silhouette of the mountains. Below, valley folds hid the enemy like folded hands. They slipped through the dark like ghosts, invisible to those who weren't watching the sky. 15 minutes to target, Morrison called. Blackhawks will be 30 behind us. Isabella's jaw tightened. 30 minutes. 30 minutes for 12 men to go into a compound that could eat them whole. Time had already become an enemy. She put the Apache up at standoff range first, 8 kilometers, the sweet tooth of the Hellfires and the safety of altitude. Her sensors painted the compound in thermal, guard towers like bright pins, the ZU-23 anti-aircraft team glowing as they watched. The pictures were clinical, but the reality would be chaotic and loud. ZU-23 prioritized, she said. If that goes, we open a window for the Hawks. Sarah Chen's words from the briefing looped coldly in her head. Time on target, 15 minutes. It wasn't a deadline, it was a heartbeat. Preparing weapons, Morrison said, voice steady. Hellfire's hot, rockets armed, chain gun ready. The first pass was for the anti-aircraft piece. Make it scream and die before it could blink. Isabella felt the familiar coolness of focus sweeping through her, the world compressing until only target and timing existed. There was no room for anything else. Not the faces in the barracks, not the orphaned childhoods of the men painted in thermal, not the weight that folded into her after missions and lay like a secret under her ribs. She selected the ZU-23 and ranged it. The targeting computer chewed numbers, distance, drift, wind, hold time, and spat out a solution. Then came the small, private ritual every pilot knew, a soft, almost reverent whisper into the dead air. Rifle. The Hellfire launched like a promise. 8 seconds of burning metal and it was over. The gun became a crater. The night filled with a new language of light, explosions marking the ends of things. Isabella didn't watch them like a show, she monitored them like a surgeon checks vital signs. Was the position neutralized? Thermal signatures collapsing? Secondary fires? Clear. She ticked each box, an accountant of survival. Second pass, bunkers and hardened positions. The TADS painted reinforced doors and window slits, the kind of fortifications meant to turn metal into rumor. Isabella launched hellfire after hellfire. The compound woke like a bruised animal, lights flaring, movement becoming frantic. Men streamed into open spaces with weapons, confusion, and a hope that perhaps something like mercy existed at the edge of a helicopter shadow. She moved closer, the Apache moving through the night like a predatory bird with manners. Rockets answered the calls at medium range. The chain gun made closer things disappear in tidy, obscene bursts. Her hands and eyes were a single instrument. Morrison called targets. Tower, west wall, motor pool, wide sweep on the south approach. Underneath the tactical hum, a different sound threaded in the radio, the thin, crisp cadence of Colonel Harper ticking down the seconds. 0230. Assault team inbound. Isabella watched the compound shudder. She could hear, in the way the HUD numbers jittered, that the enemy had not expected this level of surgical violence. They had expected chaos, perhaps rocket volleys and screaming engines, but not this. The methodical disassembling of defenses that someone had thought through with a cold engineer's eye. That was where Isabella lived, in the planning and pattern recognition that let violence become rescue. Deck 2 minutes, Morrison said. They're over the ridge. The Blackhawks came in like shadows with rotors, then dots, then full-bodied shapes. Door gunners sprayed suppression as ropes unspooled and men dropped into the compound in a heartbeat, 12 boots on ground in under 20 seconds. Isabella's role blurred into protective geometry. She put the Apache between the incoming reinforcements and every potential kill zone. The chain gun spat a wall of iron that turned any would-be lookouts into hunched figures that no longer moved. Rockets bit into corners where fighters tried to cluster. Hellfires ate the heavy doors that would have funneled death toward the ropes. Assault team down, came the clipped report. Fast-roped, moving to objective. Her sensors painted their progress in ghostly dots moving inside the compound. She saw them hug walls, prowl from shadow to shadow, enter buildings, sweep rooms. Below, the firefight was close and ugly. Men who had been asleep hours ago now ran with rifles and the kind of steady violence that hid a quieter terror. They were close enough to be hit by friendly fire if the sky misread their flags. Isabella kept her eyes wide. She had one rule: if a friendly light showed, she paused. If the thermal signature matched their IR strobes, the mark they'd been given for identification, she didn't fire. In the danger of night, such small mercies were everything. Movement out of the main building looked wrong on the screen. more men than the assault team had announced. Her gut, old as any instinct, bristled. Multiple contacts near the east courtyard, Morrison said. Thermals not matching friendlies. They were building a counterattack, fighters with vests and manic speed trying to cut the rope's exit. Isabella felt the tempo of the fight shift. The mission was no longer only about blowing things up. It was about buying seconds, 1,000 small spaces where men could live. She banked left, bringing the chain gun down in a low, sweeping arc that kept the potential flankers pinned. Tracer rounds glinted in the night. Someone on the ground cursed. A voice on the radio called for medic. The soundscape of war is made of those tiny, human moments, a shout, a request, a name. Isabella cataloged them all. Target group East Courtyard, Morrison called. Neutralize or they'll cut the extraction. Engage, Isabella said. The gun answered with the slow, awful rhythm that tore men's plans into ash. The assault team pressed forward, bodies moving like a single organism, and in a cramped, harsh hour they found their asset gaunt, eyes sunken and wild, an intelligent source who smelled of fear and old cigarettes. He had been beaten, but alive. They strapped him in, eyes flicking to the windows like animals in a den listening for wolves. Package secure, Harper's voice breathed into the headset. Extraction inbound in 90 seconds. Copy, Isabella replied. She felt the spike of everything, relief tempered by the knowledge that extraction is a promise that still must be defended. They had to move fast. The Hawks took off first, crowding the air like fragile things. Isabella established a corridor, rockets and chain gun to clear any pockets of resistance, hellfires if anything hardened presented itself. The enemy tried one last desperate measure, a technical angrily roaring across a service road with a mounted gun, a suicidal sprint to disrupt the takeoff. Technical south approach, Morrison said, 10 seconds on its flank. Isabella found the vehicle in her sights, thumbed the selector and launched a hellfire. The missile ate the road. The truck became a bloom of flame and metal. The effect on the enemy was instant. Their hope collapsed into confusion. Extraction was a ballet of violence and timing. The Blackhawks dipped, sucked up the men, and rose like wounded birds. The ground erupted with an ugly, last-ditch fury, men trying to sprint between burning hulks, weapons raised, panic turning into organized, bitter hatred. Isabella felt for a breath the world tilt toward the brutal. Her hands tightened. This is us or them, she thought, not as a slogan but as a simple arithmetic. 3 minutes to 1. Wheels up tabbed across the HUD. The assault force cleared the hot zone. Assault team airborne, Harper said, a flat, exhausted statement of fact. Isabella hovered, making sure the corridor remained open until the Hawks passed the ridge. Then she rolled the Apache away, sensors sweeping for anything that might try to chase. They left the compound in a wake of smoke and flame. The night briefly lit up like a crude altar. The rescued man breathed raggedly in the Blackhawk's belly, alive because 12 men had crawled into a nest of danger, and because a helicopter had decided to be violence with a purpose. Back in the cockpit, the adrenaline didn't crash so much as simply let go. Morrison rubbed his temple with a tired hand. 40 enemy fighters estimated neutralized, he said. Asset is secure. 0 friendly KIA. Isabella swallowed. She didn't celebrate. The counting of bodies was an ugly ledger no one wanted to tally. She thought instead of the faces she'd seen burning in the glow, the men who had tried to ambush convoys, the boys who might have been boys once. The thought cut across her like a cold wind. They had been very good at building a surprise. They had been worse at expecting a ghost to answer their cruelty. Good work, Harper said over the net. There was no warmth in it, only the hard, simple currency of success. Isabella let herself exhale when the radios finally quieted. The valley below shrank away and the stars came back into place. The world resumed a semblance of order. Morrison looked at her then, searching for some reaction that was human beyond the checklists. "You okay?" he asked. She stared at the instrument panel, at the digital smoke trail marking their path. "We did what we were sent to do," she said. "We brought them home." He didn't push. He never did. He knew the cost of good work. "Get some rest," he said. "We're getting redeployed to pick up medevac runs at dawn." She nodded and, for the first time that night, allowed herself to feel the weight of it, the hours of planning, the dozens of tiny choices stitched together into a net that had caught men who could have been cut to pieces. It was a net with holes. It was a net that worked this time. As they navigated back through the tight, black canyons toward base, the sunrise began to edge the world in gray. It looked for a moment like a promise. Isabella watched the light grow and thought about Marcus Chen in the burned convoy days before, about promises kept and those who show up to keep them. She felt, under the practiced calm, a small and stubborn kind of tired satisfaction. They had answered someone's prayer. The Apache's rotors whispered against the morning, and in that hush, for a sliver of time, the world felt like it might go on. She woke before the alarm, heart already beating in the rhythm of rotor blades. Morning in the desert didn't arrive gently. It came as a slap of pale light over sleeping machines and men who pretended they'd slept. Isabella rolled from her bunk, splashed cold water on her face, and stared into the metal mirror bolted above the sink. Her eyes were bloodshot, the kind of tired that didn't go away with rest. Behind them lay the map of every mission she'd flown, 15 minutes of terror, stretched across 7 years. Outside, the flight line shimmered with heat even though the sun had barely cleared the hills. Mechanics moved like ghosts, checking fuel, replacing panels, coaxing temperamental engines back into obedience. She walked among them, coffee in one hand, helmet under her arm. Rachel Santos waved from beneath the nose of the Apache. "Morning, Captain," she called. "You planning to let her sleep in, or you gonna break her heart by flying another mission?" Isabella smiled faintly. "She's already awake. You can feel it when she's ready." Santos chuckled, wiping her hands on a rag. "We all felt that thunder last night. Word spread fast. Compound leveled, 0 friendlies lost. I heard even the brass stopped talking long enough to say your name." "Don't believe everything you hear," Isabella said, stepping close to the helicopter. She placed her palm against the armor, feeling the faint warmth of metal that had been in the air hours ago. It was the team on the ground who made it happen. Santos gave her a knowing look. "Sure, but they wouldn't have made it off the ground without you." The debrief lasted 4 hours. Colonel Martinez, Sarah Chen, and Colonel Harper occupied one side of the table, notebooks open, voices measured. The projector replayed gun camera footage. Each explosion turned into a cold data point, every life reduced to a heat signature that flared and disappeared. 15 Hellfires expended, Morrison recited. 30mm rounds, approximately 800 used, all primary and secondary targets destroyed. Sarah Chen closed her notebook, eyes sharp. "Captain Reed, that was the most precise air support I've witnessed. You neutralized every heavy weapon before insertion, maintained overwatch, and extracted without a single friendly injury. You made a near-impossible operation look routine." Isabella shifted in her seat. "I had good intel. Good coordination makes all the difference." Colonel Harper leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Don't be modest. I've seen pilots panic under less. You read a battlefield like its language. That's not training, that's instinct." She didn't answer immediately. Praise in a war zone always sounded strange, like applause in a graveyard. "Instinct, just experience with less time to think," she said at last. Martinez gave a thin smile. "Whatever you call it, it saved lives. Command wants you to know the rescued asset provided actionable intel. You didn't just save him. You might have stopped 3 more ambushes before they happened." She nodded once, glad to hear it. But her tone carried no celebration, only the exhaustion of someone who'd measured the cost too many times to mistake success for peace. That night the wind carried a smell of rain that would never come. Isabella sat outside the hangar, back against the tire of a maintenance truck, cigarette burning low between her fingers. She'd quit years ago, in theory. War had a way of making habits crawl back from the dead. Morrison found her there, silent as always, and dropped beside her with 2 mugs of black coffee. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She gestured at the open sky. "With that view." The stars were sharp, unblinking. Out here, far from cities, the heavens looked too big, too permanent. It made everything human seem fragile, almost temporary. Morrison took a sip. "They're saying we'll be rotated out in a month. Stateside training assignment for you. Instructor track." "Fort Rucker?" she asked. He nodded. "You'll teach new pilots how to do what you do. They could use it." She stared into the dark for a long moment. Teaching, not the same as flying. "No," he agreed, "but maybe that's the point." She flicked ash into the dirt, watching the ember die. "You think it ever gets easier, watching things blow apart, knowing we're the reason they do?" Morrison looked down. "You ever notice the ones we save don't look at it that way? They don't see explosions. They see the sky finally answering." Isabella didn't respond. She thought of Marcus Chen's voice over the radio, the raw relief when she'd told him the field was clear. She thought of the men she couldn't save on other days. The balance was never clean. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "I wonder how many more times I can do this before I start liking it." Morrison didn't flinch. "That's why you're still the right one to do it." 2 days later, a supply convoy rolled through the pass where Havoc 23 had nearly died. Fresh tire tracks traced over the old craters, and the air smelled of diesel instead of smoke. Isabella flew overwatch, the Apache humming beneath her like a living creature pleased to stretch its muscles again. It wasn't combat, just vigilance. But even here, she kept scanning the ridges, remembering the men who died there. When they landed, a familiar face waited near the pad, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, arms still in a sling, uniform dusty from the road. He looked out of place among the pilots, like a soldier who'd stepped into someone else's movie. "Captain Reed," he called. She turned, visor lifted. "That's me." He saluted, awkward with one arm. "Ma'am, I don't know how to say this right. You saved my convoy last week. 15 targets in 8 minutes. I just wanted to say thank you," she finished for him, smiling gently. "You already did, Sergeant. Back then, when you kept your people alive long enough for me to get there." He shook his head. "No, ma'am, we were dead. You just hadn't told us yet." For a heartbeat, the words hung in the air, heavy and sincere. She could see the tremor in his hand, the gratitude trying not to look like grief. "How'd you do it?" he asked softly. "That fast, that precise, no friendlies hit." Isabella glanced at the helicopter behind her, then back at him. "Experience, and a machine built for redemption." "They call you the Reaper," Chen said. "I heard that from pilots at Bagram. I thought it was a myth." She sighed, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "It's a name. I don't chase it." "Well," he said, voice steadying, "from everyone in Havoc 23, thank you, ma'am. You gave us a story that doesn't end in silence." He saluted again, more solid this time, and walked away. Morrison joined her as Chen disappeared into the maze of tents. "You're terrible at taking gratitude," he said. "I'm a pilot, not a saint." "Maybe," he said with a smirk, "but you fly like one." She gave him a look that said drop it. He did. Weeks blurred into one another. Missions, maintenance, the constant hum of departure and return. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in the cockpit glass, helmet off, face older than she remembered, and wonder when the line between duty and identity had vanished. Then the orders came: transfer Fort Rucker, Alabama, instructor pilot. Her crew threw her a farewell they called a party, and she called an ambush of sentiment: cheap beer, sand-fried steaks, laughter that tried to hide pride. Even Santos cried when she handed Isabella a wrench engraved with a single line: "Bring them home." She packed light. The desert didn't allow souvenirs. Her final flight was supposed to be routine. A medevac helicopter had gone in for a casualty pickup northwest of their sector and met resistance. Small arms, maybe RPGs. No other Apache available. She didn't wait for formal tasking. Reaper 6-1 inbound, ETA 3 minutes. The valley came alive as she crested the ridge, tracer fire carving through the darkness, the medevac circling helplessly above a field littered with smoke. Morrison was already marking targets. Multiple firing positions, east and south. They're pinning the bird. Not for long. The chain gun spat fire as they dove, precise bursts walking across the ridgeline. The first impact silenced the heavy machine gun. The second swept the tree line clean. Rockets followed, bursting in measured rhythm until the field below was quiet enough for the medevac to land. "Dust off 3-7, LZ clear," Isabella transmitted. "Load your patience and get out." The other pilot's voice cracked with relief. "Copy, Reaper 6-1, we owe you one." She hovered above until the wounded were aboard and the helicopter lifted safely into the dark. Only then did she exhale. Morrison looked over his shoulder. "That's how you end a tour." She smiled, tired, genuine, with everyone alive. When they touched down for the last time, the base was silent except for crickets and the echo of the rotors winding down. Isabella climbed from the cockpit and placed her hand on the Apache's nose, the way some people touched gravestones. "Good girl," she whispered. It wasn't sentiment, it was gratitude, the kind that had no words, only breath. Years later, cadets at Fort Rucker would watch the footage of her missions, studying her precision, her calm, the impossible arithmetic of her timing. They'd learned to fly Apache by watching her eyes on the screen, steady, unblinking, alive. They'd whisper the nickname she never liked, in the same way soldiers whisper prayers before a storm. They didn't know she'd once been just a woman in a cockpit, trying to keep strangers alive. They didn't know she flew Apache helicopters. Not until she eliminated 15 targets in 8 minutes, rescued a man no one thought reachable, and proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the sky was the one flown by a heart that still remembered mercy. And in the long quiet after every mission, when the dust had settled and the world tried to forget, her legend lingered like rotor wash over the sand. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Peace was louder than war. It just had a different sound, the hum of fluorescent lights, the clatter of boots on polished floors, the low murmur of young pilots trying to remember checklists. Fort Rucker, Alabama. Home of the Army's flight school, and the place where Captain Isabella Reed was supposed to learn how to stop fighting. She walked across the tarmac every morning at dawn, helmet under one arm, coffee steaming in the other. The air here was soft, thick with pine instead of dust. No gunfire, no smoke, only the rhythmic drone of rotor blades slicing the calm, training flights, not combat. She should have felt relief. But every time a helicopter lifted off, she caught herself scanning the horizon for muzzle flashes that weren't there. "All right, listen up." Her voice carried across the hangar as a dozen new pilots stood in formation, clean uniforms, nervous eyes. "My name's Captain Reed. You'll call me ma'am or instructor. I'll teach you how not to kill yourselves in a $30 million aircraft. If you do exactly what I say, the odds of surviving your first mission go up. If you don't, well, we'll name the hangar after you." Laughter forced uneasy. But she smiled anyway. The same dry humor that had steadied her in cockpits now kept the rookies from shaking. She walked them through the AH-64E systems, hand tracing each line of the fuselage as if it were scripture. "This bird is not a weapon," she told them. "It's a conversation between you and chaos. You don't win it by shouting. You win it by listening." One of the younger lieutenants, barely 23, raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you know when to pull the trigger?" She studied him for a long second. "When you stop wanting to," she said. The room went silent. They didn't understand, not yet, but someday they would. At night she stayed long after the others had gone. The hangar lights hummed. The Apache's shadow stretched across the floor like an old companion. She'd rest her hand on the nose cone, feeling the cool metal. "You remember them too, don't you?" she'd whisper. 15 targets, 8 minutes, a convoy that lived, a compound that burned, a medevac that made it home. Every victory had weight, and she carried them all like dog tags that never came off. Morrison had left the service 6 months earlier, gone back to Texas to raise his kids. They still exchanged short messages, weather reports, jokes about fuel leaks, never about nightmares. The silence between their words was full of everything they didn't need to say. One afternoon, during simulator training, the alarms blared. A student had miscalculated a descent angle and crashed the digital aircraft. The screen froze in a bloom of fake fire. Isabella ended the simulation and approached the shaken pilot, a young woman named Lieutenant Evans. "Ma'am," I panicked, Evans stammered. "I lost sight of the target, tried to correct." "Stop," Isabella said softly. She knelt beside her. "You didn't panic, you rushed. That's different. Panic is chaos. Rushing is fear pretending to be control. Learn the difference." Evans blinked back tears. "You ever rush, ma'am?" Isabella looked at the dark screen, the ghost of flames flickering in its glass. "Once, and I still hear the engines when I close my eyes." She reset the simulator, handed Evans the controls again. "Now do it right. You don't get to quit on fear, you train until it gets bored." Weeks turned to months. The recruits began to call her the Ghost. Not for what she'd done in combat, but for the way she moved, silent, watchful, always appearing beside them when they made a mistake. She didn't correct with anger, she corrected with precision, each word like a scalpel. And slowly, something inside her began to ease. The sky over Alabama wasn't the same as Afghanistan's, but it was still sky. The Apache still roared, still lifted, still answered her touch. Maybe peace wasn't the absence of war. Maybe it was learning how to fly without needing to kill. Then came the visitor. A Humvee pulled up outside the hangar one morning, tires crunching gravel. A man stepped out, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, wearing clean fatigues and a new scar above his brow. Isabella blinked, surprised, then smiled. "Sergeant Chen, didn't expect to see you on this side of the ocean." "Didn't expect to be alive to make the trip, ma'am," he said, grinning. "They assigned me stateside for recruitment duty. Figured I'd stop by and thank the woman who made that possible." She folded her arms, feigning annoyance. "You already thanked me once." "Yeah, but this time I brought something better than words." He handed her a small wooden box. Inside, neatly polished, was a flattened 7.62 round, one that had been pulled from the armor plate of his Humvee. "Closest thing to hitting me that day," he said quietly. "Figured it belonged to you." Isabella turned the metal in her fingers. It caught the light, cold and imperfect. "I don't take trophies," she said. "It's not a trophy," he replied. "It's proof that sometimes the right person hears the call." They stood in silence for a while. The hangar fans hummed overhead. "Still flying?" she asked. "No, ma'am, got promoted to paperwork. Less heroic, more coffee." She chuckled. "Trust me, coffee saved more lives than bullets." When he left, she placed the spent round on her desk beside the photo from flight school, not as a reminder of killing, but of saving. One evening in late summer, a storm rolled through. Thunder shook the windows, rain drummed against the roof. Isabella stood outside, soaked, watching lightning fork across the horizon. She remembered flying through storms over the Hindu Kush, wind trying to tear the rotors apart, her hands locked on the cyclic, heart steady. She'd always trusted the sky, even when it hated her. Now she lifted her face to the rain and let it wash the sand from years past. The smell of it was clean, electric, alive. For the first time in forever, she felt weightless. The next morning, the base commander found her in the hangar before sunrise, sitting in the cockpit of a parked Apache with the canopy open. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Didn't try," she said, smiling faintly. "Old habits." He climbed the ladder halfway, resting his elbows on the frame. "You've trained 37 pilots this year. Highest pass rate on record. Command, offering you, Major, and the option to lead the next advanced flight program." She stared at the empty runway beyond the hangar doors. "You know, sir, the first time I flew one of these, I thought the machine was alive. I used to think that made me strong. Turns out it just made me responsible." He nodded. "That's why you're still here, Captain. Responsibility's the last kind of courage most people learn." She looked down at him. "If I say yes, do I have to stop flying?" "No, you'll just be teaching from the front seat instead of the back." She thought about it for a moment, then reached up and touched the overhead canopy switch. "Then let's keep flying." That night the cadets gathered in the classroom for their final lecture. Isabella stood before them, boots muddy, flight suit unzipped at the collar. "You've all learned procedures," she said. "You've memorized checklists, but there's something they don't put in manuals. When you go up there, you'll carry people's lives in your hands. You won't know their names, maybe not even their faces, but they'll be counting on you to show up. And when you do, make it matter." She paused, eyes sweeping the room. "They'll call you pilots. Maybe someday they'll call you heroes. But if you're lucky, if you do it right, they'll just call you Reaper 6-1, and you'll know what that means." A few smiled, recognizing the legend she never claimed. She ended simply, "That's all, go earn your sky." Later, alone again, she walked to the flight line. The air was cool, the night thick with cicadas. She climbed into the cockpit one last time for the day, powered up the systems just to hear the hum. Lights blinked across the instrument panel, heartbeat of a sleeping dragon. She whispered into the silence, "Still with me." The engines answered with a soft, rising whine. For a moment it felt like the desert again, the weight, the purpose, the promise. But there was no enemy now, only memory, only peace earned the hard way. She eased the throttle, felt the blades catch the air, and lifted into the dawn, a lone silhouette against the widening light. Somewhere below, the next generation of pilots would watch and wonder who she was. They wouldn't know her story. Not really. Just that once, in another war, there was a woman who flew an Apache into the impossible and came back. They'd whisper her call sign. They tell each other she never missed. And maybe, years later, when their own radios filled with static and fear, they'd remember her voice, calm, steady, certain. "Sit tight, keep your heads down. This will be over in 8 minutes." Because legends don't end. They just change altitude. The classroom photograph had started to fade. Sunlight from the hangar window had bleached the edges until the faces of her cadets looked like ghosts. Isabella Reed kept it on her desk anyway, a reminder that teaching was its own kind of battlefield. 7 years had passed since Afghanistan. She was a major now, hair shorter, eyes the same. They still called her Reaper 6-1, though she'd long stopped flying under that name. Legends had a way of refusing retirement orders. That morning, the call came in just before dawn. A knock at her office door. A captain she didn't know, pale and anxious. "Ma'am, there's been an incident overseas. One of your former trainees, Lieutenant Evans, she's involved." Isabella's stomach tightened. "Where?" "Eastern Syria. Quick reaction force ambushed outside Al-Hasaka. She was providing air cover." The words hit like rotor wash, sudden, invisible, shaking everything loose. Evans had been the nervous one in the simulator years ago, the one who'd crashed into virtual fire and learned to climb out again. Now she was flying real steel. Isabella pulled up the feed from the operations center, grainy infrared footage streaming across the monitor. A convoy burning, tracers arcing from rooftops, a single Apache orbiting the chaos. The call sign on the screen read Falcon 2-1. Her student. The young woman's voice came through the radio net, tight but calm. Guardian Control, this is Falcon 2-1. Multiple hostiles, Grid Alpha 9. Convoy pinned, requesting clearance for Hellfire strike. Isabella closed her eyes, hearing her own words echoed across time. You don't win by shouting, you win by listening. She could almost smell the desert again. The ops colonel noticed her standing behind him. Major Reed, didn't realize you were on site. I trained that pilot, she said quietly. How bad? He gestured to the feed. Bad enough. She's outnumbered 10-1. The second Apache took damage and pulled off station. Evans is alone. Alone, Isabella repeated. The word was heavier than it looked. What's her ammo state? 2 Hellfires left, half a pod of Hydras, chain guns jamming every few bursts. Has she requested extraction? She refused, said she's staying until the ground team clears the kill zone. Isabella felt something old and dangerous wake inside her, the instinct that had never really gone away. Patch me into her frequency. The colonel hesitated. Ma'am, she's in active combat. Patch me in. Static hissed, then a familiar voice filled the room. Falcon 2-1, this is Guardian Control. Reinforcements inbound, ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes, Evans replied, breathing hard. Copy, I'll hold them. Evans, Isabella said softly into the mic. This is Major Reed. A pause, then disbelief. Ma'am, is that really you? It's me, I'm watching your feed. Another burst of gunfire crackled through the transmission. Evans's breathing steadied. I've got movement on the North Ridge. RPGs lining up on the convoy. I can't get a clean angle. Talk me through your altitude, Isabella said. 200 feet AGL, banking west. Drop to 150, flare left. Use the canyon wall to mask your approach. Remember what I told you, listen to the chaos. Copy that. On the monitor, the Apache dipped and vanished behind the ridge. Enemy tracers searched the sky where she'd been seconds before. Then she reappeared, lower, silent, predatory. Hellfire away. The explosion swallowed the ridge line. Isabella exhaled slowly. Good girl. For the next 6 minutes, she guided her like an echo. Evans called out bearings. Isabella answered with maneuvers. It wasn't control. It was conversation. The same language she'd once spoken through 1,000 moving parts of metal and will. Targets repositioning south. Then don't chase them. Make them move where you want. Hydras running low. Use them like punctuation, not paragraphs. The operations room had gone silent, every officer listening as the 2 women worked, teacher and student, separated by continents, joined by the thin wire of necessity. Then came the line Isabella had dreaded. Reed, I'm hit. Warning light, hydraulic pressure dropping. How bad? Tail rotor control sluggish but holding. Stay level, don't fight the aircraft, let her settle. I can't lose altitude, convoy still exposed. Evans, listen to me. Ma'am, they're still firing on our guys. Isabella's hand tightened on the console. She remembered saying the same words years ago, different mountain, same math. Then make the last shot count, she whispered. Evans's final Hellfire streaked across the feed and hit a cluster of trucks trying to flank the convoy. The fireball rolled through the night. Enemy gunfire ceased almost instantly. Targets neutralized, Evans breathed. Convoy moving, copy that, Guardian. The colonel leaned forward. Extraction birds inbound. But the feed jolted, the camera shaking violently. Engine 2 failing, Evans said. I'm losing lift. Evans, eject sequence armed, Isabella demanded. Negative, over water too low. Then ride her down, pick your landing, flare at 20. The next 30 seconds were a blur of static, alarms, and strained breathing. 20:15:10. Impact. The screen went white, then dark. The room held its breath. Finally, a scratch of radio. Guardian Control, this is Falcon 2-1. A pause. I'm down but alive. Co-pilot's okay, convoy secure. Applause broke out in the operations center. Muted, exhausted applause. The kind people give when they realize they've been holding grief in their throats. Isabella leaned against the wall, eyes closed, tears she hadn't planned for tracing the edges of old scars. Major, the colonel asked softly, "You okay?" She nodded. That's how she was taught. 2 days later, Evans called from a hospital in Germany. Voice rough, spirit unbroken. "Ma'am, you still there?" "Still here," Isabella said. "How's the bird?" "Wrecked, they said the fuselage is a write-off, but the ground team made it home." "That's the part that matters." Evans hesitated. "They said you talked me down. I didn't even know they patched you in." "I didn't either," Isabella admitted. "Guess old habits die slow." There was a long pause, then Evans said, "You once told me peace is learning to fly without killing. I think I finally understand." Isabella smiled. "Good, now teach someone else." That evening, the rain came hard over Alabama. She walked the tarmac alone, lightning fracturing the sky. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted by memory. She felt connected to every pilot who'd ever gripped a cyclic with shaking hands and refused to let go. She stopped beside a parked Apache, rain running down its armor in silver threads. Her reflection shimmered in the cockpit glass, older, steadier, maybe finally at peace. Morrison's voice echoed in her head from long ago, "You scare me sometimes." She smiled. Good. Weeks later, at graduation, Evans limped across the stage on crutches, a silver flight badge gleaming on her chest. Isabella handed it to her personally. When the applause died, Evans leaned close. "Ma'am, they're calling me Falcon 6-1 now." Isabella arched a brow. "That's so." "Yes, ma'am, but everyone says it's cursed, means you never miss." Isabella chuckled. "It's not a curse, it's a promise." That night, alone in her quarters, Isabella opened her logbook, the one she hadn't written in since Afghanistan. She wrote a single line. Reaper 61, alive, somewhere in the air. Then she closed it, turned off the light, and listened to the rain. Peace, it seemed, had learned her language at last. They said she flew like a ghost. Silent until the strike, calm when the world screamed. The new recruits called her Falcon 6-1, but those who'd been around longer whispered another name under their breath. Reaper's daughter. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Evans didn't correct them. She didn't have to. Some names weren't inherited. They were earned slowly across the long noise of years. The desert had changed again. Different war, same sand. Evans stood beside her helicopter at dawn, hands resting on the armor as the crew loaded fuel and ammunition. The air smelled of aviation grease and dust, familiar, grounding. Her co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Perez, adjusted his helmet. "You ever get tired of this view, ma'am?" Evans smiled faintly. "You stop noticing the sand once you start listening to what it says." Perez frowned. "What's it saying now?" She looked toward the horizon, where the sun bled red across the dunes. "It's saying, don't forget who taught you how to survive it." Back at Fort Rucker, the photo still hung in the hall, a young Isabella Reed surrounded by cadets, her arms slung around a nervous lieutenant who hadn't yet flown real combat. Evans paused before it whenever she visited, tracing the outline of her old instructor's grin. The brass plate beneath Reed. MAJ Isabella Reed, Reaper 61, Instructor 2015-2021. Below it, smaller letters, "She taught us to listen to chaos." Evans would smile, whisper, "Still listening, ma'am." Then she'd walk away before the lump in her throat got noticeable. Her first mission as flight lead came with no ceremony, just coordinates and a promise. An Allied patrol pinned down outside a border village. Insurgents dug into the ruins. Two Apache were tasked for overwatch. Evans briefed her team in clipped sentences. No civilian structures targeted. We move fast, we stay clean. If anyone hesitates, that hesitation gets people killed. Perez raised an eyebrow. Sound familiar? Yeah, she said. I had a teacher who believed in repetition. When they launched, the air shimmered with heat. Rotor blades beat like heartbeats against the morning sky. Over the target area, chaos waited patiently. Gunfire flashed from rooftops. The patrol below was pinned behind an overturned Humvee. Evans banked left, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Perez marked muzzle flashes, north roof 2 shooters, chain gun. Copy. 30mm rounds tore through the air, precise, surgical. Evans didn't shout. She didn't even breathe loudly. The radio stayed clear, her tone measured, the same tone that had once come through a speaker when she was the terrified student. Within minutes, the pressure on the patrol eased. They began to fall back, dust clouds rising around them. Perez looked over. All targets neutralized, that's one for the books. Evans nodded. They'll write the book, we'll just turn the pages. Back at base, the younger pilots crowded around the debrief screens, eyes wide. Ma'am, how'd you keep so steady out there? One asked. Everyone else was panicking. Evans took off her gloves, expression calm. Because panic's loud, control whispers, you just have to know who to listen to. Another pilot spoke up. They say you trained under Major Reed. Is it true she never missed? Evans paused. She missed plenty. She just learned faster than failure could catch her. They waited for more, but she ended it there. Some lessons weren't meant to be explained, only lived. That night, Evans sat alone outside the hangar, a small notebook open on her knee. Rain started to fall, soft at first, then steady. She wrote, Isabella Reed still flying somewhere. Thunder rumbled far away, like rotors spinning across another sky. Weeks later, an unexpected order arrived. Joint mission, classified. A hostage recovery deep inside a mountainous region once considered unapproachable. When she saw the coordinates, her pulse stilled. Afghanistan. Perez whistled low. You sure you want this one, ma'am? Full circle and all. She zipped her flight suit. Full circle's the only way some stories close. The valley looked almost familiar, as if time had folded back on itself. Night vision painted the world in green ghosts. The radio crackled with tension. Guardian Actual, this is Falcon 6-1. Visual on target compound. Holding pattern. Copy Falcon, ground team en route. Expect heavy resistance. Evans took a deep breath. She could almost feel Major Reed beside her, that same calm that steadied storms. Perez pointed to the ridge. Multiple heat signatures, tripod mounts. She nodded. Line M up. We'll give the ground team a sky worth believing in. The first rocket streaked out. The second followed before the echo of the first explosion faded. Below, shadows scattered. Half an hour later, the extraction was underway. A wounded operator called over the net, Falcon 6-1, we're clear. If you hadn't. Don't finish that sentence, Evans interrupted. Just get home. Perez grinned. Sounded like something your instructor would say. Yeah, she murmured. Guess the ghosts are good company. When they landed, dawn was crawling over the mountains. Evans shut down the engines, but the ringing in her ears wouldn't stop. She climbed out, helmet in hand, and stared east, toward the same ridgeline where Reaper 61 had once flown. It felt like standing on someone else's footprints. She whispered, I hope you saw that, ma'am. Maybe the wind answered, maybe memory did. Either way, she heard it. You did fine. Months later, back at Fort Rucker, Evans was promoted to major. During the ceremony, the commanding general spoke about legacy, courage, and mentorship. He ended by quoting a line carved into the base's memorial wall, words once spoken by Isabella Reed herself. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Evans touched the metal pin to her chest, feeling the weight not as pride, but continuity. That evening, she visited the training hangar. A new class of cadets waited by the simulator, bright-eyed and restless. She smiled the way Reed once had, soft, knowing, almost maternal. "All right," she said, "first lesson. This helicopter isn't just a machine, it's a promise. Between you, the people you protect, and the silence that comes after." One cadet raised a hand. "Ma'am, how do we know when we're ready?" She paused, remembering her own question years ago. "When you stop needing to prove it," she said. The room went still. Somewhere in the distance, an Apache engine roared to life, training flight for dawn. Evans looked toward the sound, heartbeat syncing with it. She whispered under her breath, almost a prayer, "Fly straight, listen close." Later that night, alone on the runway, she opened her flight log. "Last page." She wrote, "Reaper 61, confirmed eternal." Then she closed it gently, as if tucking in an old friend. Far across the ocean, in a dusty village that had once known her mentor's name, an old mechanic still told stories to children about the woman who'd flown like thunder. He'd point to the sky when they asked if she was real. "Maybe," he'd say, "but the real ones never leave, they just fly higher than we can see." And so the legend lived, not as a name on a plaque, but as the pause between rotor beats, the calm before courage. A chain unbroken, teacher to student, soldier to soldier, woman to woman. War changes, machines evolve. But the language of resolve stays the same. Because somewhere, every time a young pilot whispers into her headset, "Falcon 6-1 on station," the sky still answers back. Soft, sure, eternal. Reaper 61, watching over. They said wars end. But for those who have flown through them, peace is only another kind of sky, wider, quieter, but never fully still. Major Sarah Evans had learned to live inside that silence. Years had passed since her last combat flight. Her hair was threaded with silver now, her gait slower, but her gaze still carried that precise calm that once steadied men under fire. She'd taken command of the training wing at Fort Rucker, the same hangar where Isabella Reed had once stood, telling wide-eyed cadets that machines could listen if you were quiet enough. Every morning, Evans walked the flight line at dawn, tracing her hand along the cold armor of each helicopter. "Morning, girls," she'd whisper, "don't scare them too much today." The world outside hadn't stopped burning. Conflicts changed names, borders shifted, but fear never retired. One humid afternoon, the call came. Not a mission, a request. A hurricane had torn through the Gulf, flattening coastal towns. The National Guard was overwhelmed. An old airfield had flooded. Civilians were trapped on a nearby island. Evans studied the map. "Evac in storm conditions," she muttered. "Visibility near zero, perfect time to prove the laws of physics wrong." Her adjutant frowned. "Ma'am, we've got younger pilots for this. Let them take it." She smiled softly. "That's what Reed once told me. I didn't listen either." Rain slashed sideways across the tarmac as she climbed into the cockpit. Perez, older too, with a streak of gray in his beard, slid into the co-pilot's seat. "You sure about this, boss?" "Storm's just weather," she said, tightening her harness. "We've flown through worse. Remember Kandahar?" He laughed. "Yeah, you swore at God in 3 languages." "Still got one left." The engines roared awake. Blades blurred against the rain, lightning painting white veins across the clouds. They lifted off, the Apache's weight cutting through wind like an argument against gravity. Half an hour in, the radios filled with distress calls. Falcon 6-1, we've got civilians on rooftop 11 Delta, water rising fast. Copy, Evans replied. Mark the coordinates. She flew low, skimming the flooded streets. Cars floated like ghosts of an old life. The wind hammered the rotors, threatening to push them sideways. Perez squinted through the rain. We can't land. Then we hover. She steadied the bird, nose into the gale. Two rescue swimmers rappelled into the churning water, grabbed the stranded family, and signaled. Evans held position, muscles burning, voice even. Listen to the chaos. When the last survivor was lifted clear, she exhaled, a long trembling breath that felt like release. Falcon 6-1 to command, she said. Roof 11 Delta secure. Copy, next site 5 miles east. Perez glanced over. We can call it, ma'am, you've done enough. Evans shook her head. Not until they're all out. Hours blurred into one continuous roar, wind, rotor, heart. On the last pickup, lightning struck a transformer near the shoreline, blinding them. The helicopter jolted hard. Warning lights bloomed red across the console. Hydraulic pressure dropping, Perez shouted. Evans gritted her teeth. Hold it together, we're almost there. Tail rotors gone. She eased the cyclic, fighting the spin. Auto-rotate, we're not dying in a hurricane. The world tilted sideways, waves, fire, sky. Then the impact, water slamming them like a wall. When she woke, there was silence. The kind of silence only found after noise has broken itself. Perez was coughing beside her, alive. The helicopter lay half-submerged in shallow surf. Rescue boats were already approaching through the rain. Evans sat up slowly, blood trickling from a cut over her brow. Her hand still gripped the cyclic. Perez looked at her, dazed. You never miss, do you? She smiled faintly. Not when it matters. They pulled her out of the wreckage at dawn. She refused a stretcher, walking on her own toward the waiting medics. The sky was clearing now, streaks of gold breaking through the gray. Reporters would later call it a miracle landing. Command would call it unnecessary risk. Evans called it doing her job. When a young soldier asked her why she'd gone up herself, she answered simply, because someone once flew through a storm for me. Weeks passed. She recovered slower this time. The body heals in days, the spirit takes longer. One evening, she visited the memorial wall again. The same plaque, the same name. MAJ Isabella Reed, Reaper 61. Evans stood there a long time, palm pressed against the bronze. Guess I finally understand, ma'am, she whispered. Peace isn't silence. It's the moment you stop needing the war to prove you're alive. She smiled, small and tired. I'm going home now. Years rolled forward. Cadets came and went. New wars began, ended, began again. And somewhere deep in the archives, a file sat under a layer of dust. Training record Falcon 6-1/Evans, Sarah. Beneath it, handwritten in faded ink, evaluated by MAJ Isabella Reed, exceptional composure under pressure. Decades later, a young pilot named Maya Delgado walked through the same hangar, running her hand along the side of an Apache. Who was Reaper 61? She asked an old mechanic sweeping the floor. He smiled, a teacher, then a student, then a storm. Maya frowned. Is that a story or a riddle? Both, he said. Every pilot here flies with a ghost. Some call her Reaper, some Falcon, doesn't matter the name. What matters is when the chaos starts, you'll hear a voice in your headset telling you what to do. Calm, certain, that's her. Maya laughed nervously. You believe that? The old man looked up at the sky. I've heard it myself, he said, when I shouldn't have made it home. That night, as Maya took her first solo flight, the base lights stretched out like constellations. Her heart hammered, hands slick on the controls. Then in her headset, faint and steady, came a whisper. the kind that sounds like memory more than sound. Listen to the chaos. She smiled through the fear. Copy that. The helicopter lifted, slicing through the night. High above, wind moving through the clouds, two names lingered like echoes woven into the air. Reaper 61, Falcon 61. Not ghost, just guidance. Not myth, just memory strong enough to stay airborne. Because courage doesn't vanish. It takes new forms, new faces, new call signs. And somewhere, every time a rotor spins and a heart steadies, the sky still remembers them. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply flies.